Hi everyone, and welcome to this 11th episode of the NERPS webinar series on the Peace and Sustainability Nexus in the context of global change. Thank you for taking time to join us today. I am Mayub Sharifi, an associate professor at Hiroshima University, and I will be your moderator for this webinar today. If this is your first time joining our webinar, the Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability, NERPS, is an international network of educators, researchers, and practitioners collaborating towards the advancement of peaceful and sustainable societies amidst global challenges. We started this webinar series last year and will culminate with the NERPS Conference on Peace and Sustainability that is scheduled for March 1 to 3 next year. You will hear more about the conference soon. The call for proposals will soon be announced, and we would like to invite all of you to consider joining the conference. So Professor Kaneko later will give you more details about the conference. The theme of today's webinar is disaster risk reduction under conflict situation. And we are very honored to have Professor Takako Izumi of Tohoku University with us today. Now I would like to invite the NERPS director, Professor Kaneko, for some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Ayub, and good morning, everybody from Japan, and hi for the rest of the world. For those of you who have joined us in the previous webinar, thank you and welcome again to join our webinar. And for those who are joining us for the first time, this webinar series and initiative we at NERPS have started here at Hiroshima University last year. As mentioned already by the Professor Sharifi, we envision these initiatives to serve as a platform to encourage us to rethink and update our knowledge and the practice surrounding the peace and sustainability nexus, especially in this time of rapid global transformation. So we invite leading experts to share their knowledge with us about emerging topics on peace and sustainability, including sustainable development, ways to achieve the sustainable development goals. One of the other particular goal of this webinar series is to expand our network to be large enough for preparing to have to organize a conference to interact in person. For this, we will have the first NERPS conference during March 1st to 3rd in 2022 in Hiroshima. And I'm excited to announce that Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the first and inaugural speaker of this NERPS webinar series, recently agreed to present again in our NERPS conference 2022 as the keynote speaker. At this moment, if the situation permits, Professor Sachs is willing to come in person in Hiroshima. So we look forward to it, and then all of you are welcome to join the conference and hope to see you all in next March in Hiroshima. Today, this is the 11th webinar, and I'm very glad to have the first speaker from Japan. And the topic is particularly relevant to SDG 16 as it focuses on involvement of non-governmental organizations and the implementation of disaster risk reduction measures in conflict situations. So I hope you will enjoy the webinar today, and thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaneko. Now, please allow me to briefly introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Takako Izumi. She is an associate professor at Tohoku University's International Research Institute of Disaster Sciences, working on global frameworks and strategies for disaster risk reduction. Her research focuses on international disaster risk reduction strategies, humanitarian assistance, and DRR initiatives at the local and community level. She is concurrently serving as director of the Multi-Hazards Program that was started in 2013 by the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, APRU, a consortium of 57 leading research institutions across the world. The Multi-Hazards Program aims to harness the collective capabilities of APRU universities for cutting-edge research and disaster science, and contributes to a policy-making process at regional and international levels. Before joining Tohoku University, Professor Izumi spent more than 15 years working in the fields of disaster risk reduction, response, recovery, and development with NGOs and various United Nations agencies, including UN Habitat, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And since May 2015, she has been serving as a member of the UNDRR Asia Pacific Science and Technology Advisory Group to support the efforts of governments and stakeholders in the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. She holds PhD in Global Environmental Study from Kyoto University, Japan. Professor Izumi, we're very honored and happy to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Sharif, for your introduction, and also thank you, Professor Kaneko, for your opening remarks. And good morning, everyone. My name is Takako Izumi, and I'm from the International Research Institute of Disaster Science under Tohoku University in Sendai, Japan. So I think you have heard about the city Sendai, and Sendai City was very badly hit by the Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami in 2011. So our institute, it's called IRIDeS, was established after 2 years. The Great East Japan Earthquake happened in 2011, then that was established in 2013. So since then, and our research institute is focusing the research on, especially on recovery and also disaster risk reduction, and working very closely with different stakeholders, including international and regional organizations and a lot of universities. So I'm very honored to be here today, and I really appreciate the invitation to be a speaker today in a very important session. All right, so and today I will talk about at the first half, I will talk about the disaster risk reduction, including the international framework for disaster risk reduction. Then second half, mainly I will talk about disaster risk reduction and challenges in under the conflict situation. So these are the graph showing how disasters and natural disasters are increasing recently, and it particularly the impact of climate change. I'm sure you can see or feel the change of the climate, and especially the global warming. So the blue line is that flood, and the yellow line is the storm. So that's weather related or climate related disasters are the main challenges for us right now. And the green line at the bottom is the earthquake. So an earthquake does not get any impact from climate change, as you know. Then that's why it's actually very stable, the number of the earthquake itself. Okay. Then this graph also shows how floods and the storms are occupied the main disasters lately. So basically 90% of major disasters are considered as a result of weather-related events. Then the number is really increasing the last 10 years compared to the past. Then the major, of course, the underlying causes is the climate change, and climate change will increase the number of floods and the storms worldwide. So in the face of the climate change, of course, we need better risk management and mitigation to reduce the death tolls and other heavy losses. So that the current and the very traditional risk management, the way we do is not enough. So that for the future, we really need to strengthen the capacity, preparedness capacity, and also the disaster risk reduction capacity. So I'm not sure how many of you are really disaster experts or are studying disaster risk reduction. So that I will touch upon a little bit very basic of the disaster management cycles and phases. And maybe most of you know already. And when we talk about the disaster management or disaster risk reduction, we usually talk about based on the phase. We divide into 4 phases. Then this green one is a response, and this is the actions we will take right after, immediately after the disaster strikes. So this includes the rescue activities and also the providing the relief goods, food and water and emergency relief goods. So that it can be, it also depends on the size of the disasters, but it can be very short, but it can be very long. Then the next phase is called recovery. Then usually that will take much longer than the response phase. And recovery includes economic recovery and the livelihood recovery and also the infrastructure recovery. And it's all the buildings and housing recovery. Then there another phase is that we called mitigation phase. That includes the improved infrastructure. For example, the buildings which includes the earthquake resistant structure, and also strengthen the building code and the land use, strengthen the land use regulations. So usually mitigation activities can be done together with recovery. That is really encouraged to conduct both together, recovery and mitigation. Then another phase is a preparedness. The preparedness usually includes more soft side of the preparedness and disaster risk reduction. And it includes the evacuation drills, conducting drills, and develop emergency response plan, and a lot of education and training activities, and also the early warning. So these 4 phases we consider when we talk about disaster risk reduction or disaster management. So when we talk about the disaster risk reduction, one of the biggest challenges is that not enough investment or funding for disaster risk reduction will not gain. Rather, a lot of funding goes to response or recovery activities. That means everyone pays after something happened. So even though if we spend or invest more budget prior to a disaster strikes, then the damage and impact can be reduced. But unfortunately, still the situation is a lot of budget goes to only a disaster happened and occurred. So this is still a quite challenging and difficult part for all of us. Even international communities, still they provide a lot of funding after something happened. So we are trying, we are making a lot of efforts to change that kind of mindset. Then, and I think the situation is getting better, but still we need to work much harder to, to make everyone, including government, understands the importance of disaster risk reduction and also the investment in disaster risk reduction activities. And how then global society and international communities work for disaster risk reduction is that I think the major milestone is that this one. In 2005, there was a UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, where the framework and documents called Hyogo Framework for Action was adopted by 168 countries. So this was the first very international document which stated clearly the priority of actions for all the countries need to take the next 10 years. So, and the reason that this conference was very active is that, and the year before in 2004, in December, some of you may recall it. There was a huge tsunami and earthquake happened in Indonesia, and it hit a lot more countries, but mainly in Aceh in Indonesia. Indian Ocean tsunami happened in 2004. So that made a lot of awareness on disaster risk reduction. So this UN World Conference happened in 2005 that attracted a lot of people. And because of that big disaster happened the year before. So, and after 10 years, 2015, and there was another UN conference on disaster risk reduction, which was held in Sendai here. And at the time, and the document is called Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was adopted. So in 2015 is a very important and year for all of us who are working for disaster and also the development and peace building and environment, climate change, because 3 international documents were adopted in the same year. It's one is a SDGs, and another one is Sendai Framework, and another one is Paris Agreement. So the next 15 years, and these documents, and based on these documents, there are so many challenges and topics we have to work on together. So I go through very quickly what is the Hyogo Framework and Sendai Framework. So as I mentioned, in the Hyogo Framework, firstly, the priority of action was adopted. Then the priority action in Hyogo Framework includes 5 priorities. Then in Sendai Framework, that includes 4 priorities. So today, I will introduce the 4 priorities in Sendai Framework, especially. The first one is understanding disaster risk. Of course, without understanding disaster risks, you cannot come up with any solutions and also the projects and programs to tackle these issues. So it's most important to understand what disaster risks you have. Then strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risks. And disaster risk reduction is not no longer for the government responsibilities, but everyone has to work on that. So in that sense, not only the government, but rather all of us, even communities, academia, and the private sector, needs to come up with some disaster risk reduction strategies and policies and regulations to in their own risk governance. Then third is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. So I just mentioned earlier, investing in disaster risk reduction is also very important and crucial. And but still, it's not really sufficient. So we have to really work harder to promote the importance of disaster risk reduction. The last one is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So this one highlights the importance of the preparedness to provide the better response activities. Then build back better, I'm sure you have heard this term many, many times, not only for disaster risk reduction context, but rather in many contexts. And when we do that recovery, we have to think about not only to back before, but rather we have to create the better preparedness in the recovery situation. So the difference between the Hyogo Framework and Sendai Framework, you can see from the keywords in these 2 documents. So in Sendai Framework, these documents, different terms are much highlighted compared to Hyogo Framework. For example, the innovation, the term of innovation was much used frequently in Sendai Framework, and particularly health, so that the linkage between health and also disaster risk reduction activities are much, much highlighted in the Sendai Framework. Then others include science, technology, cooperation, gender, and climate change. These terms are much, much underlined in the Sendai Framework, and as the things we have to focus on the next 15 years. So that these can be the keywords that we have to remember when we talk about disaster risk reduction. So center framework includes, firstly, the very concrete targets we need to achieve by 2030. So I'm not going to go very detailed on that, but just briefly introduce. It includes 7 targets. For example, we have to reduce the mortality, the number of the affected people, and economic loss, and also the damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. So these 4 are the ones who we have to work on reducing. But on the other hand, some parts we have to work to increase. For example, the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies. Then second is enhanced international cooperation. And lastly is that early warning systems. So these 3 parts we really have to work on to increase. So these are the 7 targets. Then, I mean, since already 6 years after this document was adopted, there was some review report, and you can see this report on the net from the internet. But this is just a midterm and also the snapshot. So there is no concrete analysis or any conclusion yet. They just introduced the number, what is the progress and what is the situation right now. So at the end of the term 2030, they will see the average comparing the before, whether it was increased or it was whether it is decreased. Okay. Then the good news is that, and these 4 we have to work to increase, and the 2 target, the evidence showed it's already the situation is getting better. For example, target E, this is the ones we need to increase the number of the DRR national strategies. And 80 countries reported already they have national DRR strategies, especially they are allied to Sendai framework. So this is very encouraging. Then the last one, the early warning things, and all 59 countries reported, and they said they have a multi-hazard monitoring and also forecasting systems already. So that clearly the number who have their early warning systems and better equipped is increasing. So that it is still 60 countries reported, but hopefully the next 10 years or so, these number keep continuing increased to have the early warning system and also the better monitoring system. Okay. So that's on my first part. And now I would like to go to the conflict things and compare to under the conflict situation in disaster risk reduction. So the current challenges is that Sendai framework makes no reference to the key terms of violence, conflict, fragility, war, and peace. So that shows how important it's not really materialized to concrete and clear linkage between conflicts and disaster risk reduction. And usually disaster risk reduction has mostly been developed and applied in peaceful countries. And of course, you can imagine how it is. Then countries often labeled as fragile or conflict affected typically have lower coverage of disaster risk reduction strategies. Then we need to challenge perceptions that conflict is too political to be included in DRR strategies. So these are the current challenges and something the current situation we have to put in our mind to consider these 2 things, conflict and disaster risk reduction. So then UNDP has in their report, they already clearly stated some negative impacts on disaster risk reduction by conflict. For example, in conflict, it weakens local coping capacity. Then that increase vulnerability, the people's vulnerabilities. Then also weakened governance structures. So based on the weakened governance structure, so their disaster risk reduction and response capacity and quality of related social services is also undermined. Then because of the conflict situation and displacement, the people displacement is increased, and that also impact and harm a lot of disaster risk reduction and other humanitarian actions. Then a war economy and related to criminality can lead to specific aid agency response that hamper recovery efforts. So these are the negative impacts already clearly stated and selected by UNDP. So I conducted very small scale of survey among NGOs. What are their challenges when they conduct disaster risk reduction programs and projects in conflict, the countries under the conflict situation. So I picked up 2 countries, Afghanistan and the Philippines. Then I conducted some survey questionnaire from 5 NGOs in each country, in Afghanistan and the Philippines. And you can see most of them are local or national NGOs. Of course, international NGOs are working in these countries, but rather most closely working in this issue to the communities or mainly local or national NGOs. So 5 NGOs each in each country and region. Then first question was that what is the challenges and what is the projects you are conducting related to disaster risk reduction? Then highest is that community empowerment and also the learning from other stakeholders. This is more like for NGO staffs and learning disaster risk reduction and other situation and from other stakeholders such as government officials and regional international humanitarian organizations. So both countries and most of the NGOs are working in community empowerment related to disaster risk reduction. And it also depends on the country. In Afghanistan, they also do a lot of advocacy work and IC materials and development and infrastructure reconstruction. And on the other hand, in Mindanao, in the Philippines, they are working on climate change activities together with related to disaster risk reduction. Then when we asked what are the major constraints when they conduct disaster risk reduction, both countries mentioned insecurity is the hampering their projects and programs. Then the next is the lack of funding. Then the rest of the cases, it's also that depends on the country and the different situation. And for example, Afghanistan, the next is cultural and constraints and the local tradition. So I think that implies in Afghanistan, still for women, it is not really easy to get educational opportunities. So that kind of situation may be impacted on the programs and projects as well. So these are the 5 indicators and just a repetition from the UNDP report. These 5 indicators are to be used to see what are the situation, the DR project situation under conflict situation. And we have to focus on weaken the local capacity and migration and displacement and poor governance and war economy, criminality, and limited access to populations. So when I asked these indicators, criteria, and how these NGOs think about which one is the most relevant for them, so that both countries said poor governance have major impact on their project and programs. Then next would be the weakened local capacity for both. But for Mindanao, the biggest the challenges is the limited access to population and migration and displacement as well. So of course, it shows that depending on the country, the situation and the challenges could be different. So when we consider to tackle and resolve these situations, we have to see, of course, the country by country. We have to see that the situation and how the people who are working there see the challenges as well. So then we asked what would be the how we can improve that situation and help programs they are doing right now. So both countries, there are 2 common areas they highlighted is that one is capacity development of national and local NGOs and civil society and community-based organization. Then another point is that development of multi-purpose projects. So the reason why the capacity development of national, local NGOs and CBOs are required is that disaster risk reduction is not, as I mentioned, it's not really common for everyone yet. Response and recovery is much easier to take an action and conduct, but rather disaster risk reduction, they need some sort of and more knowledge in how to reduce those impacts and how to assess the risks, so that and before they conduct and start disaster risk reduction, they need to know what will be the most effective and how they can start and initiate disaster risk reduction projects under conflict situation. So that empowerment for NGO staff is a very, very crucial. Then the idea they come up with is that not only to start DRR, in a simple DRR project, but rather they have to put these elements into other, combine other projects. That'd be much more effective, not only to start disaster risk reduction single project. So these are the some case studies NGOs is conducting, and it's called the multi-purpose project. In Afghanistan, one of the NGOs from Malaysia, they are conducting empowerment in women and the vocational training center for women, and also the comprehensive health clinic in Afghanistan. This is also for women and children. So when to conduct these trainings for the vocational training, they also included some aspects of disaster risk reduction elements. For example, they did that, they include the component of what disasters are and how people should prepare themselves for disasters and how to prepare emergency back when they need to evacuate, and what is evacuation plan. And these kind of elements, they also talked about in the vocational trainings, then encourage them to share the information with their own family. So even in the health clinic, they also did the same type of the sessions with women and children who came to the clinic. So, this kind of idea to combine other programs and also disaster risk reduction. But to conduct this kind of things, of course, NGO staff have a quite good enough knowledge about disaster risk reduction. Then and they can create and start this kind of multi-purpose projects. So this is also another project in ongoing in Afghanistan, and they are focusing really already in the governance structure in their community and also the district and province. So they formed the disaster management committee at village and district and provincial level to encourage them to conduct an assessment by themselves and make some preparedness plan. So to involve these key, the people at the different levels is also a very good idea and very good start to initiate disaster risk reduction. This to involve in this kind of leaders is also very important. So that this is my last slides to conclude. And as I mentioned, two things are quite key for NGOs and humanitarian groups to conduct disaster risk reduction. Firstly, to conduct capacity development of national and local NGO staff, and to increase their knowledge about disaster risk reduction and what will be the most suit and the best activities for them, and targeting women and children and all local government officials, this kind of things. Which one would be the most effective? It depends on the country situation. Then that disaster risk reduction project would be good to have to combine with other different types of projects. So it's called multi-purpose projects. Then people can get much more attention. And even if we say, conduct disaster risk reduction, but people might say, it's not really important or urgent. But rather, if we combined and vocational training and health clinic and climate change, for example, then it may be correct more attentions from the people and public. So in Afghanistan and Mindanao, I took the survey and it has a different characteristics and features. So when we consider the projects and programs, we have to understand the country and also the local context and the current situation as well. So, and again, capacity development, multi-purpose projects would be the better idea to lead disaster risk reduction implementation and the conflict situation. But of course, it's not all, but rather we might have quite a good innovation and ideas recently. So I need to continue to learn more from these our partners and NGOs and NPOs in these two countries. Okay, so thank you so much for your attention, and I'm very happy to have your questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Izumi. This was very insightful. So now we have questions from Tika. She's a PhD student at Hiroshima University. She wants to know how is women's preparedness and vulnerability related to the disaster comparing to men? How is women's social, psychological health affected by the disaster comparing to men? And also, what are the effective disaster risk communication skills for women who were the victims of disasters? So if you could please react to these questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Some of the data says the women is much more vulnerable to disasters compared to men. And from the experiences of a lot of disasters, including the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, and even before the floods in Bangladesh, and they say more women was affected in these disasters. So the reasons, the why the women are more vulnerable to these disasters is that first of all is that education, and women and sometimes very less educational and learning opportunities compared to men, so that they don't know, they don't realize what a disaster is. For example, what is tsunami? And when tsunami happens, the earthquake happens, usually we have to consider tsunami may come. So in that case, we have to evacuate from the sea coast. But those kind of ideas, if we don't have, and people just stay in the sea coast and don't take any evacuation actions. So that kind of things, women, it's a little bit slow to take any evacuation actions compared to men. And another thing is that even though women has that kind of knowledge, women have tendency to protect children and their family, so that they will go back to their own home, even though they know that's a dangerous, there's danger, but they are really take care. They think about their children and family, and they actually rush to their home and to meet children. So on the way to go back to their home and places of children, in that case, on the way they are affected, and also by the disasters. So these kind of things are considered as a reasons women are more vulnerable. That's why we have to increase the education opportunities and awareness opportunities for women about disaster risk reduction. So the term in this natural disaster is not natural. It's because natural disasters, the damage can be reduced by human actions. So that if something big, a damage caused, it's not only the natural, but rather it's because we did not provide enough education situation, or we did not build enough infrastructure. So there are so many things we can do, especially for women. And another question is women's health, the health or psychological impact on women. And I think it's probably the same thing, and they have a very strong tendency to consider about their family, children, and they have a responsibility on family. So in that case, they might have a much bigger, the psychosocial impact if they lost their family or something. So that would be also, we have to be pay attention in much care on women's health and also the psychosocial situation after disasters. And effective communication, effective communication in way to women is that I think we can take in, the maximize a lot of opportunities. I think it's also depending on the country. That's why you have to understand what kind of situation right now. Like, the Afghanistan, as I mentioned, women has limitation and to have education. So in that case, you also have to think about to change that kind of system at the beginning and maximize the opportunities, the different types of opportunity. But if you have very equal opportunities for women and men to have education, then you can just increase the disaster risk reduction aspects and usually the curriculum in universities, or you can take the education disaster education program in elementary school or junior high school, like in Japan we are having right now.
We have another question from Rosa Kebia Stella. I don't know her affiliation, sorry. So the question is, what do you think is the impact of digitalization on risk management and disaster risk reduction?
I think that's a very, advanced aspects we have to think about. And digitalization, I'm not sure what particularly you are talking about digitalization, but there are so many things I think is better in positive ways for disaster risk reduction. For example, and when disaster happens and we have a lot of issues to provide in assistance after that. For example, for people who need special care and who has disabilities and elderly and the people, but sometimes we don't know where they are living and what kind of issues they have. Even in Japan, we still have a lot of issues on that. And also when after disaster strikes and people has to go to the hospitals, but hospitals are not really linked in digital systems, so that the hospitals and doctors cannot understand what kind of in health conditions each patient has. So that kind of things we learned from the recent disasters. So if we have digital systems and understand the people's condition and situation, where they live and what kind of programs they have. Of course, this is related to privacy issues. So that's something also that we have to discuss and think about. But those kind of data can be definitely is useful for a better response and recovery activities. And we can definitely use the disaster risk reduction activities. So that I'm sure there are so many positive ways we can use the digitalization.
Indeed, and if I may add to that, I think the early warning systems that you correctly mentioned in your presentation, and you showed that there has been some progress on that front, those are also some manifestation of digitalization, if you agree with me. So they have been contributing a lot to dealing with disasters. And we have one question from Janiel. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, sorry if not, from Kyoto University, PhD student. And the question is, how do we integrate linguistic, it means language minorities, into the formal DRR policies and plans, especially in conflict areas? Janiel, if you want to give us more details, I can enable your microphone.
Okay, hi, good morning. Thanks for the very detailed and informative presentation. So my question really is, so with the advent of globalization and people are moving for different reasons, we have persons in countries that don't speak the national language or the de facto language, in which preparedness, trainings, drills, or even risk is communicated. So they don't have a handle on the national language. So how do we, so they are, I would say, vulnerable as well. So how do we integrate them into the DRR policies and plans? Because I think that language is not given priority, especially in disaster education.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Yeah, I totally understand what you meant. Yes, and as you mentioned, considering the right now the globalization and also the international communities, I'm sure that would be quite a key issue for disaster risk management and also the response and activities. So yes, this is just an example from Sendai City. And Sendai City is and also quite, we consider it a big city. And we have different, we have the people, different nationalities. And even in this university, Tohoku University, have a lot of foreign students like your university is. So in that case, this is a lesson learned from the Great East Japan Earthquake tsunami in 2011. At that time, already there are so many foreigners and they really do not have enough information. And they do not know how to evacuate and where to evacuate. And even they evacuated, that's probably the most difficult issue for them. In evacuation center, things are so chaotic. Then everyone needs to consider about themselves or their family. So not really consider about the people from outside and whether they understand what we are saying. And sometimes if they don't really understand the local culture and context, they might be a little bit puzzled how they can behave in that kind of evacuation center. So that's the lessons learned from the 2011. So we started and together with the local government, for example, Sendai City and us, and also the university, we conducted some public seminar and saying, it's like a simulation exercise. In each group has a foreigner, and in group, and we are assuming this is evacuation center, and how do you prepare and communicate with the people who are from different countries, and how do you communicate and explain the situation and how to live in the evacuation center. So that kind of exercise we are conducting in collaboration with the local government, academia, and foreign and students communities as well. So but the thing is, this kind of situation is not really fully understood unless we experience this kind of challenges. So and I think there are so many networks and associations already who are involved in foreign, the work with the foreign students and the foreigners in the local communities. So and together with these communities, I think you can raise the voices, the need, and also the universities and the foreign students can assist, and definitely those associations work together. And I think university can be the one who can also really and support these groups as well.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Rick. The question is, what is your take on the benefits of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the context of DRR? Again, this is the digitalization.
Yeah.
And the next question is how the alternative institution contribute in addressing the gaps of government and market failures of DRR. So I'm not sure if by alternative institution he means this artificial intelligence. So Rick, if we'd like to clarify, please give us some clarification.
Yes, thank you very much, Ayub. The first
Yes.
question actually is something to do with how the government optimally utilize the benefits of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Of course, in developing, it might be vividly discuss the benefits in developed countries. But in the context of developing countries, I think it's a challenge actually of how developing countries appreciate the value of artificial intelligence and machine learning? That is the first question. The second question actually is about the government and market failures. I'm referring to the alternative institutions. This refers to the community-based organizations and like the non-government organizations, because the issue on, for instance, the issue on information asymmetry, that only the government are equipped or aware of the information. However, communities on the ground are not pretty much aware or do not have access of the information.
Artificial intelligence, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on that area, so that I'm not really, I don't think I can clearly answer to your question. But yeah, I'm sure there is some gap between developing countries and developed countries, and how to use the AI and also that the machine learning. And I'm sure there are so many innovations. If Professor Sharif has some ideas, I hope you can add later on. But yeah, for developing countries, I really do not think they have to. There is no such a thing. They must try or they must rely on AI or machine learning. But there are so many other things you can do. And for example, and we published lately the book. It's called 30 Innovations for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we also took some survey for among all the NGOs and academia. What are the what do you think the best and innovation in the past about disaster risk reduction? And all they said, they never said any advanced technology or anything, but rather what they said is that community-based, the concept of community-based disaster risk reduction. That was the most innovative idea to promote disaster risk reduction. That's the result. So if you don't have that kind of advanced, but we have to understand without any approach, such approach, community-based, any an advanced approach, AI, whatever, is not really good enough. So I think at the same time, we have to definitely remember the kind of approach, community-based and other local and indigenous knowledge, and also the tools and the methodology as well. Then a second one, I think, I'm not really sure I correctly understood your question, but you also mentioned information sharing among or public, the community and civil community-based organizations. And community-based organization would be very important for the future, in particular, the developing countries and the conflict in the countries under conflict situations, because other, the from outside and the people, it's very difficult to enter these areas. So that's why I said these people are really need to increase their knowledge in advance, not really rely on government, but rather individually, if they can, they have their own knowledge, then that would be also the good. And one of the activities, NGOs also worked with the local leaders. So that kind of things, collaboration with the local leaders, community-based organizations, and who knows the local context and culture and religions very much. So I think that kind of collaboration would be really important. And of course, the government has and probably might have a much priority to access to the better information, but still there is some roles to play for community-based organizations and the leaders in an innovative way, I think. But it has to be really the country and region context. So I really cannot very specifically to touch upon the results. Solution. But I hope it's somehow it answered to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I fully agree with you that these two should not be separated, because technology is not a silver bullet that cannot solve anything, all the issues. So they need to be implemented in collaboration with the community and through bottom-up activities. So I understand that we might have more questions, but it's almost towards the end of the session. So before closing, I would just like to ask one question myself. I know that you mentioned that neither in Sendai framework nor in Hyogo, there has been a direct reference to conflict. I was wondering if this is because these frameworks have been mainly crafted by countries that are peaceful, or could it be because of that or not? But I noticed that you also mentioned the term cooperation, which has been mentioned much more frequently in the Sendai framework, and that could probably be linked to peace as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And I understand there are some discussion before Sendai framework or Hyo framework is adopted. Of course, that is an international framework, so there is such a lot of discussions, and they spent quite a lot of time, 1 year, 2 years, to come up with the the final document. So even just before, there are some discussions whether they would like to put these conflict aspects into the DRR documents or not. Then I'm sure it's 186 countries they discussed, then finally somehow they came to a conclusion. They did not include that aspect. Then, as I mentioned in one slide, a lot of people think simply conflict is just too political and too complicated to combine with disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction itself is too complicated, and if we include conflict, it's we might lose our direction or something. So that I really not sure what would be the the finally why it was excluded. But there was a discussion, and there was some a lot of countries and the people who thought we have to combine it. And there's some research institute like ODI already issued a report and analyzed why it was not done. But they really think we have to change our mindset. Conflict itself is not really too political, but there is some way we can the combine or some the mainstream that concept into the disaster risk reduction strategies. And they really encourage the national policies to include in line with these two things. So I think it's still there are so many hopes, and we can still work together on that.
Thank you. I can understand all these complexities of UN-based frameworks because you need to make consensus between different parties. So this brings us to the end of the session. I would like to once again thank you very much, Professor Izumi, for your great talk. We've learned a lot, and we also look forward to further collaborate with you and your institution in the coming years. And I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today and for your engagement in the discussions, for the great questions that you raised. And once again, I would like to remind that next year, to keep the momentum, we will have the first NERPS conference and the peace and sustainability, and also their nexus. So please consider joining us next year. And before ending, please also visit our website. It's the details are now available here at the chat box. Please visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter. So we look forward to further collaborate with all of you in the future, and hopefully to see you in person during the NERPS conference. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.